This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, it's Alan Shimmel and welcome to another interview segment here on TechStrong TV. Our guest for this segment is Tim Reilly. He is the CEO of Zettaset. And Tim, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Alan. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. Tim, you know, our audience is a mix of DevOps and security and cloud-native digital transformation. I realize some people may not be familiar with Zettaset, so why don't we start off with just a quick, kind of Zettaset background.
Sure. Zettaset is software only for encryption. That's meaning that there's no proprietary hardware that it has to run on. We can run on any generic white box, and because of that, we're able to sit closer to the core, and with doing that, we have high performance, and it's transparent when you're down that far, and we can scale across whatever geography, and because of all that, you're able to have a simple install, and the maintenance is a lot less than what would be expected of another encryption solution.
Excellent. And is this offered as, it's not really like a SaaS application because you get the software, you install it in your core?
Yeah, exactly. This is software. We're not providing software as a service or anything like that. This is downloadable or installable. We could have somebody come out, but that's the play we're out here.
What about if it's in a public cloud?
We can run in there as well. We can run on-prem. You can run in hybrid environments. You can run in instance in Amazon or Azure or Google.
Excellent. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, Tim, let's dig in. You guys recently had a couple of announcements around encryption and cloud-native Kubernetes containerized environments. Why don't you share with our audience a little bit?
Yeah, I think overall, getting from DevOps to DevSecOps, there are definitely a couple different checkpoints you have to have. One is obviously shared responsibility between the developers and the security teams. And one of the paths down that I think we all know is the integrity of a container. But in addition to that, you also need to have the data within the container taken care of. And that's where we come in. We have the ability, if the container touches and it mounts and it touches data, you may have a multi-tenant situation. Well, that data needs to be encrypted at rest. Now, you take that up to the next level above just a container, and you can imagine with Kubernetes touching so many different containers, managing 1,000, there are so many attack vectors in there. And what we've done at Zettaset is we've created the ability, wherever these containers are spun up, wherever they're managed, we can encrypt the data that they're tapping into at rest.
Excellent. You know, Tim, I'm sitting here thinking as you're talking, and maybe it's because of 20 years in the security business, but it seems like such a no-brainer for me. You know, when you can buy a laptop today, and whether you buy a Mac or a Windows, there's BitLocker or there's encryption option built in. Why didn't they build an encryption option like right into whether it be Docker or Kube or even take it up one level to these Kube distributions like an OpenShift or a Rancher or the Mirantis product. You know what? It seems like that should have been a quick checkbox in there.
I love exactly what you're getting at. You take a step back, go to legacy. How long were we dealing with data before encryption came in? Encryption really just took off within the last 15, 20 years, if you think back about it. Well, now we have this digital transformation where all this data now somehow needs to translate from point A in legacy to point B. And in doing that, again, we're speeding along, seeing the value that we can bring to a customer with that DevOps, with continuing innovation and development. And afterward, people are looking back going, well, we have more attack vectors in this new process. And with that comes the ability for data breach, data theft. And I think finally we've got to a point where there's so much data it could be anywhere. It could be in the cloud, on-prem, could be out on the edge. And it's easy pickings for any bad actor. Finally, you see enough wise people go, wait a minute, we can't really go any further into production with all these containers until we have a way to protect the data at rest. And I think the adoption, if there's a great study by the Cloud Native Compute Foundation that just came out, whereby they show the various stages of DevOps, and the one that's production is the only one that's down But now it's started to increase like this. And I think there is an invisible wall that says, all right, if we go any further into this, we're really going to expose ourselves. Imagine compliance, whether it's obviously GDPR or HIPAA, or even the new one, the Consumer Privacy Act California has and other states will have. There's a lot of data, a lot of personal data that's now in containers, and encryption needs to be fundamental to it. It can't just be password protection. It can't just be auditing and logging. You kind of have to have what I call the third leg of the stool, which is encryption within it.
Agreed. I guess my question is then, if I'm Red Hat or Mirantis or Rancher or any of the cloud players, public cloud folks, why, just like Linux comes with packages, why wouldn't I include sort of a Zettaset package into the distro?
I think it's wonderful because you have containers and then you have Kubernetes managing thousands of containers. And again, there's data exposure there. Now let's go up to the next level where I think it's a pretty well known that Kubernetes is tough to manage in and of itself.
To say the least.
Hey, I'll salute the DIYers out there. That's amazing. But the other 80% of us are going to lean on AWS or the cloud or VMware with Tanzu now, definitely Red Hat OpenShift, or even you'll see some of the infrastructure players like who we partner with. One of them would be HPE with their new container platform they just announced.
Yeah, I just saw that, yeah.
NetApp has Trident. So all these guys have this proprietary layer. And I think if you're going to enable people to manage Kubernetes, you also have to protect Kubernetes. One can't be without the other. And I think when I talk to these partners, and we are partnered with each one of them at some level, they all agree, well, if there's going to be a differentiator for each one of them, or just maybe espousing the importance of security, they see encryption as an integral tool in there. So you're right. Any distribution you have, it has to be a checkbox. It has to be a tool that's included.
Agreed. Now, let's talk about the practicality of encrypting, right? If we use Kubernetes as sort of the orchestrator, which is what it is, right? We kind of install this encryption across, whether it be dozens, hundreds, or thousands of containers, right, within my install. What kind of performance hit does that, at some level, if you're on a big cloud, huge infrastructure, it shouldn't really matter at some level, but it does still, right? And not everyone is on one of the big three public clouds.
I agree with the concern there. There's a couple different ones. If you go down a checkbox, you can scare people into saying, okay, encryption, we need it. But then the next part is, well, what are the inhibitors to it? Why haven't more people adopted it? And at the very top, you're absolutely right, it's performance. I'm sure some of your audience realizes this. Encryption will ultimately slow down performance because it is doing calculations, it's decrypting and encrypting. To me, the thing you need to reach for is, how do I minimize that performance hit? And the guys we have, I love them. They came initially from a company called Ingrian that went to SafeNet, and SafeNet went to Gemalto. They designed and built the initial key secure. And why I say that is you need to take that experience and look at it and go, okay, I knew that we need encryption. I knew that we had to minimize performance, and now software is the way to minimize performance. Now that data can be contained in a container, it can be in a VM, it could be in bare metal, it could be in the cloud. But in all those instances, if you can put the data and the encryption around it at a low enough level, you're looking at performance impact of anywhere from 2 to 7%. And really, that's exactly what we wanted for the end users. And I think anybody, regardless of whether it's Zettaset, that is what everybody should strive for. I think, in my mind, the end user and the customer and the partner should demand, if I want to encrypt and have a differentiator, one of my value props should be that I'm going to make encryption so it does minimize, the performance impact is minimized. Now, if I can continue down that, another one of the inhibitors is transparency. Imagine Alan logs in, he's got to wait, and he check, and he's like, God, what is going on? There's no one login, and then the data is presented to you, and the performance does not impact everything you're doing every day. So transparency and high performance, I think that is a value prop that's compelling, and hopefully in my mind as encryption, I wouldn't say zealot, my guys on my company are, but if you're gonna embrace it, take those two inhibitors off the table and make people want it. I'll leave it at this, my VP of engineering always says this, Tim, if we take all of the issues off the table, why wouldn't you just encrypt? We're making it simple enough, like a passport now. Think about an iPhone. It's always encrypted. No one knows it. And they've made it so easy that it's behind the scenes. We kind of view that as how you can look at encrypting containers and Kubernetes and these proprietary management platforms. Really take that step and embrace DevSecOps.
Excellent. Tim, I've got a question more, I guess, in the really in the guts of this thing, right? So in a non-containerized environment, hypervisor or bare metal, whatever, I've got all my data. My data maybe is in a database or not, or a flat file or whatever your data's in, and maybe that data is encrypted. And then, of course, we need to access that data from my application. So I pull it out of that data source, whatever the source is, decrypt it. It gets run in the app. Hopefully the app is hardened and, encryption in transit and all that. And when I'm done, that data gets rewritten to my data source file, and it's encrypted, right? Because it's encryption at rest. In a container, you don't have a single data source file. You're liable to have hundreds of data source files. So is each container, maybe this is an elementary question and I'm ignorant, but does each container have its own encryption, or is there a single encryption legend, if you will, right? Or across the multiple containers? Do you understand what I'm trying to ask? Is the encryption just that one container, or is it that same encryption pattern and key or whatever across all my containers, or however many containers?
I will say this: I spent an hour, I must have been about 6 months ago, asking the very question you did, and I needed the one-on-one. And here's how I could explain it. If you have the data, let's just do the usual cylinder that represents the database, okay? And you're going to have multi-tenant in that. All right, you're going to have one volume that's this, X, Y, and Z. Well, if there's one key to get to that entire database, if you have one compromised container, guess what? You get all the data.
The whole thing.
So what we've been able to do is if you've sectioned off for the multi-tenant with volumes, we have one key for the containers that need to use that data. And yes, that one key can be allocated to, say, 100 containers, but those 100 containers are only going to touch that one volume within a database. So effectively, a bad actor can only get to that. They can't find someone else's data within that. And that's probably the easiest way to describe it. And I'll just say this, take it up a notch with Kubernetes. Imagine there's all of a sudden a storage volume that covers, like on a vSAN, all over the globe, and how many different pieces of data you'll touch. And you have to be able to protect these ones. I mean, think about all those attack vectors that are there now. So we've been able to identify where we can encrypt, allocate a key for just the jobs that they are going to be touching, and the rest of the data is protected. So it's not easy, and if you can minimize performance, that's a differentiator. And I think that really is the concern for, I think, everyone with containers is, oh God, any container can touch this stuff. How do we minimize that?
Excellent. Tim, again, maybe this is too far down the weeds, but is this encryption and everything, the UI to manage it, is that sort of integrated into, I've seen some, especially if you're using an OpenShift or Ansible, I've seen UIs for, Kubernetes and so forth. Does Zettaset fit in there? Does it have its own UI?
Right. So I mean, what it comes down to is a volume driver, or a CSI, if you're familiar enough with them. So what happens when, let's just use a Rancher on the top, or an OpenShift. When they call Kubernetes, on the way down, they call us on the way down. We fit in seamlessly. We're not interfering. It's just an extra call down that says, all right, I'm going for that data. And on the way down, can we encrypt it and use a Zettaset encryption key to get to it? So that's where the seamless transparency part comes in. But in each one of the managements, whether it's just containers or Kubernetes or OpenShift, you have to insert yourself without inhibiting anything, or in our case, just become part of the process. And that's really where it comes. You become a call for the volume, and then we touch it. So if that makes sense,
Yeah, no, it does.
You do. Okay, great.
Next question, I guess, is, I'm sorry to be peppering you with all these questions. I usually don't do this. I have a much more conversational interview. But, I'm just sitting here in my head running this all through because, quite frankly, I haven't come across encryption yet in Kubernetes and containers. And I take it as a really big positive because I think it's a real sign of maturity, right, in the market that, I think people, as we said from the outset, Kubernetes and Docker and this whole thing, it's not for the faint of heart. And if you can have someone else do it and let them manage it for you and you're good with that, amen. But, the fact that now we're saying, okay, how do we lock this down, right? And I think we're going to start seeing sort of gold standards in terms of configurations and everything. But So my question, though, is, I spoke so much I forgot my question, but where do we, in a multi-homed environment, right? Multi-homed and multi-tenant, well, I guess it wouldn't really overlap because each tenant has their own key, has their own kind of private Idaho. So it's not an issue there at all. What about, does the size of the deployment make a difference, Tim? So, if you're having a really small one, what do you think?
I think, and that's the benefit when I started this whole conversation about being software. You can't drop a box in every data center. If you just have software, it can be scalable. I think that's the answer to your question. It's simple as that. Yeah, the container. So just yesterday, in fact, we worked with Anarchist, Docker now is with them to talk about that very thing about how do we encrypt within a container? How do we do it so we don't impact performance? And yeah, it's got to be software only. And it was a great conversation with them, and they get the value. And when you have even a Docker, which currently is about 89% of all containers used out there, and they're realizing, yeah, we've done everything great. We have all these tools from partners, but when it comes to the data, we got to encrypt it down at the volume level, and these guys can bring it to us. And it's not just us. I know we don't want to make this a commercial pitch. It's simply, let's espouse the fact that we need to guard this data with encryption. I gave this one analogy, which is, think about it as a castle, and the castle has a moat. The castle has thick walls. It has guard towers. It has guards. You get inside, and it's probably got more locked doors. Well, at the end of the day, what if you get through all those and you get to the treasure? That's where encryption is. You still have it as your last line of defense. So it's important.
Like I'm playing Zelda.
Yeah, you're dating yourself now, Alan.
Yeah, forget that. But Tim, let me ask you a question. If you sell it as software, though, and if I have a small deployment versus a big deployment, I shouldn't pay as much. How do you price this then to fit the job?
It's we view the role of encryption as if there's infrastructure. I think in general, it doesn't matter what IT organization and how you price it. They have a certain threshold of what they're willing to pay for encrypting the data. Now, if you're saying you're 90%, if it's almost the same, no one's going to pay that. There's no value in that. But if you're down at a point where the percentage is low enough where someone goes, yeah, I get it. The value to protect is worth X percentage of the overall infrastructure cost. That's compelling. And for instance, I'll give you an example. Docker, I think we all know their pricing model is per core. And that's exactly what we do. We try to match what they do. So in conjunction with their core pricing, we give core pricing as well. So it's a nice little bundle. And in that case, just like Docker, if you only need it for, say, 100 containers, like you say, a small one, Sure. We sit there with them, and we'll be able to win together with small or large clients.
Got it. Tim, we're about out of time. I realized for anyone who wants more information, we didn't even give them a URL or anything. Where can they go?
They can go zettaset.com. ZETTASSET.com. You should see how fast I have to do it. Zebra elephants. Yeah, everybody needs to hear that Z. You never know what they're going to say.
Absolutely. So, Tim, thanks so much for joining us and telling us about Zettaset solutions in the encrypted containerized space. We'd love to have you back on because I think we can there's more layers of this onion to peel, and we'll do that. But for now, we'll wrap it. Tim Reilly, CEO of Zettaset, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Shimmel. We'll be right back.